Hello guys, it's Ryan here with Hobbies and Man once again, and today we're going to be doing another book review, although technically this is a review of a web serial, and it's not the first one I do on the channel. I did do a web serial review or a conversation where I talk about web serials before, actually earlier this month, or past month, sorry, in February I think, covering the nature of predators. But this is a book review about The Wandering Inn, book one, which also happens to be volume one, which is basically the first 30-something chapters of the story, more or less. I can't remember exactly how many chapters it is, but it is a big honkin' chonker of a book. I think the book form, the book version, which you can get on Amazon, I think clocks in about 1,200 pages, 1,200 pages, and it seems like a lot. It seems crazy, but it is well worth it. It's really easy to read. And if you read it through the web serial instead of the book, it's really easy to just be like, okay, I'm done for now. Let me leave and come back to it, right? It doesn't feel the same as like a book that you realize, hey, I'm not done with it. Thanks to the nature of the way the chapters are structured on the web serial, there's a little bit of an easier time generated with you being able to leave, right? Which maybe it's not something that many people struggle with, but I feel like enough readers struggle with the idea of not finishing books. And with the way that The Wandering Inn is structured, I think that it alleviates some of that stress. So I think it's good in that sense. But yeah, it's a self-published. It's published by, or it's created by pirateaba, who I'm like 99% sure is a woman. But I don't think it's confirmed. If it is, let me know that in the comments. Not that it really matters, but a lot of their writing and some of the things that they focus on really feel like, yeah, this is a woman writing this. And I think it's interesting because it adds a lot of, like, it feels like her experiences added a lot of flavor to the book. And I really like that. So, yeah, demographic-wise, I'm not really sure. I would call this a YA, but not in the type that YA actually means, right? Like, this is not a type of Harry Potter book, nor is it Percy Jackson, right? Which is a little bit on the younger side of YA. This is more like YA post-Hunger Games, post-2012, right? Like, after the dystopian era, when YA actually became for 30-year-old women. Like, that sort of YA. Like, it's accessible to all ages, but it is probably better that you read it while you're closer to being a teenager than if you're farther away. But I don't necessarily think teenagers would actually appreciate something like this, right? So, whatever that genre is, or sorry, whatever that demographic is, I think that that's the demographic this book is, which is, it's a really weird demographic, but a lot of books that I end up reading feel like they fall into this one, right? So it is what it is. That's what it is. It's YA, but the adult type, if that makes sense. Or you could just say it's kind of like a shonen anime, right? Something like that. In that same kind of vein where it's like, it's technically like for young people, but mostly adults consume it, if that makes sense. So I guess that's just all ages, right? Whatever, it doesn't really matter. The point is, if you find a web serial, it's for you. There you go. That's all that matters here. And in terms of genres, this is isekai, fantasy, slice of life, existential, if that makes sense. Like, there's ruminations on like the world, if that makes sense, due to the fact that these characters that are isekai are not 14 or 15-year-old children like in most light novels. These are like proper young adults, right? 20s, maybe even going into their 30s, something like that, right? So these are young people, and the isekai kind of aspect reflects that they're young people, but they're not so young that it's kind of ridiculous, right? So yeah, in terms of adaptation, it does not have one, and it's pretty unlikely that it ever will because of the sheer size of this, right? And because the reality is that sometimes just because something is enjoyable to read, it doesn't necessarily mean it's enjoyable to watch, right? Or that if you adapt it into a different medium, it would work. I do think this would work as an anime type thing, right? But it would have to be like an anime the size of One Piece. And I don't think that that's possible, right? I would like things like this to be in comic book format. But again, it would have to be like One Piece. And I'm not really sure that a slice of life manga or comic book would actually be able to last that long, right? Like an action series is able to last as long as it really wants to, as long as the author keeps it interesting, because it's so like easy to be invested and to not lose interest, because it's not exactly repetitive, right? Like there's like every fight is slightly different, whereas slice of life things are generally pretty similar in context, right? So I don't know if that made sense actually, but hopefully you guys understand what I'm trying to say here. But yeah, it's not adapted into anything. It'd be cool as an anime, like I said, but I doubt it'll happen. And as a rating for this first volume, right off the bat, I do want to say it's probably like 4.5 out of 5 or 5 out of 5, depending on the day you ask me. Today, I'm leaning towards a 4.5 out of 5 because it's not perfect, and that it is immensely enjoyable, right? But there is kind of like a certain level of like slogginess, right, associated with a book this large, right? Whether that is because some of the perspectives aren't interesting initially, right? And they might become interesting later, but while you're reading them for the first time, you're just like, fuck, I don't want to read this. I don't care. Get me back to the other character, right? And also because you can argue that some of the length of the book is maybe not necessarily needed, right? And if this was like traditionally published, it would have probably been like slimmed down a lot, right? Yeah, today I would call it a 4.5 out of 5. Tomorrow I might call it a 5.5 out of 5. The point is that it is like very high up in the things that I like, right? And it's been about 10 days since I finished reading this first volume. I read it in about 4 days. And I was like stuck to my phone, right? I was glued to my phone. I couldn't let it go. I really wanted to be reading it all the time, right? So in that sense, it's immensely digestible and it's really addicting. But also because there's issues with it, I can't give it a 10, like a 5 out of 5 or a 10 out of 10 or whatever rating you want to give it. But I highly recommend that anyone that is interested gets around to reading this, right? And so what is the premise of this book? Well, in general, the premise is that one day a bunch of random people from Earth get isekai'd. And no one really knows this, right? This is kind of like known to you throughout this book at some point during the book, but not necessarily at the beginning, right? But it's not really spoiling anything because obviously if there's one person that gets isekai'd, it's very likely that many other ones will get isekai'd, right? Like this is a massive isekai type story, not a singular character type story, right? And so they get isekai'd to a world that has D&D mechanics, right? A lit RPG type mechanics. And I don't really necessarily think that this would be a lit RPG. This is more like game lit. Like the game element exists and it is part of the story, but it is not necessarily the sole important driving force of the story, right? Like when it comes to like lit RPGs, usually what I think of is like there's a leveling system and the character is immensely interested in the leveling system because once they reach the height of it, something happens, right? This isn't really the case. Like this is just like the leveling system helps the characters, but it is not the reason for their existence, if that makes sense, right? So, yeah. And they arrive in this world. They don't really know what the hell's going on. And then we focus in on Erin. And Erin is a character that isekai'd by herself. She randomly appears in a forest one day after she was trying to go to the restroom in her house. And then she basically has a horrible few days where she's being chased by monsters. And she eventually finds a deserted inn. She ends up taking it over by accident, gains the innkeeper class, and so begins her life in this horrible but immensely interesting but also really cool new world. And that is basically the premise here, right? And if you're not interested in spoilers, skip to the rating section at the end, right? So I talk about all of the stuff that's in the book that I found interesting, and I'm going to say spoilery things. And so if you're not interested, feel free to, get away from this video. Or if you want to know a little bit more about some of my thoughts on the book, go down to the rating section in the scroll bar, and that'll let you kind of skip all the issues that you might have, right? So, yeah, thank you guys very much for watching if you're about to leave. And if not, thank you very much for staying. So let's keep going to the plotline segment here. So I basically explained the beginning section of the book. The only part that I didn't mention before was that basically Aaron gets transported into a cave. This cave happens to have a dragon. And I think this dragon is actually supposed to be Teriarch, who's a character introduced later on in this book. But I'm not sure. And he is startled by her appearance, and so he burps out fire. Not necessarily because he meant to, just because out of his natural reaction. And Aaron thinks that he's trying to kill her, and so she runs away, right? Then she's chased by goblins and a bunch of creepy crawlies everywhere. And it sucks. And eventually she finds the inn. It's fucked up, it's old, it's, messy, it's dusty as hell. There's like thick layers of dust everywhere. And she stays in it. She starts cleaning it. And because she so efficiently cleans, and because she finds that her basically her survival instincts end up kind of like forcing her to focus on something in order to stay, able to function, essentially. I don't know what to call it. There's a word that I want to use, but I can't remember the word right now, right? So, in order to stay coherent and not, fall into despair, Aaron employs this technique of just, focusing on one thing and focusing on that thing until you can't focus on it anymore because you've done with it, right? And so, the thing that she decides to focus on is cleaning the inn. All I have to do is clean the inn. I have to clean the inn. I have to clean the inn. And because of that, and because of the function of the world, when she falls asleep exhausted, she gains the innkeeper class. And so she becomes an innkeeper because she has been taking care of it by cleaning it, right? And this affords her some very basic skills that help her better take care of the inn. And so ends, one of the first few days of her new life. But it's actually the beginning of her new life in the sense that now she has somewhere to be and a base, and from here she can grow and expand as needed for the story, right? And so, yeah, she becomes an innkeeper. The next day or the next couple days, she goes out for food. She finds a fucking crazy rock crab, which is really, really cool. I think this creature is awesome. It's very fun. And then some goblins. She manages to survive and eventually find some food. And we kind of fast forward through this portion of the story because, although it's enjoyable, there really isn't too much happening here that's really important, right? And eventually, 2 people show up. And it turns out that these are not humans. They're people because they're sentient, right? But they're not people as in humans, right? And it turns out that these guys are from a city that's actually really nearby. But Aaron is just kind of dumb and also not really able to to see it that well because of the terrain in this area. And these 2 guys happen to be a drake, descendant of dragons, and basically intelligent, reptile person, Relk, who is actually a very important person in town, and a ant-man or a bug man of some kind called Calabuckle, right? So there's different ways to pronounce this. I think that the audiobook narrator says something like Kilabitch, right? Something like that. But the way I read it is Caleb Kitsch, right? That is how the letters come up. And so I actually spent a long time saying Calabuckle in my head. And then realized, oh no, this is just Caleb and Kitsch, right? Those are the 2 little groups of letters that make up his name. And a lot of people just call him KLB, right? And so I just started calling him Caleb in my head, although maybe that's not really the right way to say it. I think it's better than, coming up with something weird, right? I don't necessarily need it to be like a very wonky sci-fi fantasy name, it can just be Caleb or Calebich, right? Something like that. So I'm just going to keep calling him Caleb throughout this book. If you're upset by that, I apologize. Sorry, but it's just way easier to say Caleb than, anything else, right? So, they introduce themselves. They become friendly with Erin. She manages to make some food for them, mostly pasta. And we basically learn pretty quickly what these types of people are, right? So Relk is kind of like a bro dude, a frat guy. And he's kind of dumb and lazy, but he's very, very good at his job under the right circumstances, right? And Caleb is a lot nicer. He's very, thoughtful and generally gentle with people. And I think that this is a direct comparison with the fact that he has a history as a very important member of the Antinium race, right? Of the bug people race, as a very fearsome warrior. And so he comes with a different type of personality in order to just make sure that people don't freak out because of him, right? And so these two characters become very friendly with Erin, and specifically Caleb. Now I want to say it differently, but I'll keep calling him Caleb because that's what I call him in my head. Caleb takes a certain liking to Erin, right? And so she now has friends and directions to go to town. And so Erin eventually makes it to town. She experiences racism, right? Because this city that they're in, Liscor, is a city of two different groups. So there's the Drakes, which are the lizard people that I mentioned, although they don't like being called lizard people because when you in this world, when you talk about a lizard person, you're actually thinking more of a salamander person, like someone that is an aquatic reptile turned humanoid, right? Whereas Drakes are very much like magically descended from dragons, and so they're kind of like a different type of person. They're not related, even though, surface level, they would be like cousins, right? Like a slightly different version of the same species, but they're not. And the other major group that lives here is the Gnolls. And Gnolls are hyena men, right? And this is the first time I think that I've experienced this type of fantasy creature. And I think it's really cool. They're basically werewolf people in the sense that, like, they're kind of like werewolves, but they don't have any of the werewolf magic stuff. Like, these Gnolls are hyena men, and that is exactly what they are, right? However, I think they're different from Beastkin, which are another type of group that exists in this world. But I'm not really sure if they distinguish themselves from them that much. Like, they look different, I guess, but, they are still animal humans, right? The same way that Beastkin are animal humans, right? Or animal humanoids, right? So I'm not really sure. But these two groups, and of course the Antinium, which don't really interact with the rest of the city all that much because they have like a hive structure. And so there's really only one person from the Antinium that is actually supposed to have the like social level to interact with people, and that is Caleb, right? And so the Drakes don't like humans because they think that they're shitty. And then the Gnolls don't like humans because the Gnolls think that humans are dirty because humans smell bad to their like very advanced noses, right? And so she experiences this racism. She's like, dude, I didn't do anything. Why the fuck are all of y'all so mean to me? And well, Erin doesn't say fuck. She doesn't really like cursing, but you kind of get the idea, right? She's dealing with this. It all goes kind of badly. She gets ripped off, but eventually she comes back and solves the issue, right? But it's pretty interesting that this happens, and it'll be okay later. She's back home. She has a battle with the goblins again. They came to her. They actually came to attack her home now, and they all come. The warband comes. The hobgoblin, which is the chief of the goblins, comes in, and she has a very deadly battle with him. And this is actually kind of traumatizing for her. And it's actually something that comes up throughout the rest of the book and even into book 2, which I've already read, right? And this is the first time that she actively kills something and realizes the consequences. And in fact, it's so bad that she actually like falls asleep next to this body, and I think she wakes up next to it as well. Eventually, I think Caleb shows up to talk to Erin, realizes what's going on, and helps her kind of get rid of all of the mess, right? But I really enjoy this aspect of this story. I thought the battle with the goblins was great. And also the visceral, like, fuck, this is horrifying reality of killing another humanoid was very well done. Like, I really appreciate that this was, like, highlighted in such a way because it is really fucked up, right? And it's something that isekai and generally fantasy novels don't really deal with, right? And I think that this is also a reason why I've seen a lot of people say that they don't like Erin as a character, because she actually like reacts like a person, I guess. Because, you know, usually when someone gets isekai'd or someone gets put into like a lit RPG type scenario, they instantly become like psychotic murderers, right? And they really do this in order to kind of pull on the power fantasy vibe. Like, he doesn't have a reaction. The male character that's, you know, the main character of these stories won't really have a reaction, or have one, but then immediately process it really fast so that we can get rid of this kind of like downer aspect and move on to the power fantasy stuff, right? But because of the nature of this book, and maybe because of what pirateaba wants to really deal with, this is not skipped. And Erin does not become like a crazy murder hobo that's really interested in killing everything all the time and gaining levels, right? She is really deeply affected by this reality, by the fact that she is a killer now, and that she has to kill to survive actively in many cases. And it really fucks her up. And I really appreciate this. I think it's great because she's supposed to be like from Michigan or something. I think she's not, but at the time of reading this, I thought she was from Michigan, and I think actually she's from... No, sorry. I thought she was from Chicago when I read this, because she mentioned Chicago at one point, and I thought that was where she was from. In book 2, I learned that she's from Michigan. It doesn't really matter all that much. I mean, she's still from that general area of the world, right? But she's from, you know, a middle-class kind of household. She's never really had to, you know, struggle to survive. And most people in our modern era are kind of able to live like that and probably have never killed anything beyond a bug, right? And so killing a bug isn't really like you don't really feel anything, because like we understand that bugs are bad, basically, or we think that way, right? And so getting rid of bugs and getting rid of pests is whatever, right? But if you kill something like a rat or something more mammalian, right, you probably have a reaction to it, right? I've never killed anything myself, but beyond bugs, but like I can understand why like a normal person might actually have the same type of reaction as Erin. And I think that realism is phenomenal. Like, I really like that. I thought it was great. So yeah, I spent a long time talking about that, but I think it's really important, right? And then eventually, after this, a few days later, or a few moments later, I think like a day and a half later, we meet Pisces, the pretentious necromancer, and this guy is hilarious. It's like if Draco Malfoy was combined with like a hobo and was really into necromancy, but also was not like a shitty person. Like, that is what Pisces is. And I love this character. I think he's shitty in like the perfect way. Like, he's enjoyable because he's so ridiculous, because he's so annoying. But Erin thinks he's annoying. She immediately clocks on to the fact that he's pretentious and stuff, and she doesn't really let him get away with his shit. But because of who he is as a person, he like continues to go on with his, you know, ridiculous prattling, and it's really funny and enjoyable to see them interact, right? I really enjoyed basically every moment that we have between Pisces and Erin. I think it's fun. And he basically ends up mooching off Erin for the rest of time, essentially. Or for the rest of the book, at least. And then we switch over to a different point of view at this point. And this is the first time I really have any issues with the book, because we get introduced to this character, Ryoka Griffin, who is a half Japanese, half American girl. She's from New York or California. It's really unclear in this book where she's from. I think in book 2, they actually mentioned where she is from properly. And she's in her 20s. She is a runner, which is a special type of delivery service, right? And it's kind of weird, but also not that weird, right? Like, if I remember correctly, in Mesoamerica, because they didn't have, you know, horses and stuff, people had to actively like run to deliver things, right? And so they had this system, and I don't know if it's true or not, but I could have sworn that I read once that this system of running that was in Mesoamerica actually went from Machu Picchu all the way to the Aztec Empire, right? And from the Aztec Empire, it went up to North America at some point, right? So this system of runners in order to carry messages and deliver things is not really that weird. It's not really any different from something like a marathon runner, right? Like the original marathon runner, the one that created the concept, right? By running a message from one place to the other in, without stopping, like crazy, right? It's the same concept, right? But Ryoka is not really a character that I liked initially, right? Well, that's not necessarily true. I was bored of her perspective because I was not really interested in it because I was so invested in Eren. And so whenever I saw this character, I was like, oh, I don't care, right? And I didn't like her because of that. But in terms of character, she's basically what you would assume a teenager with a chip on their shoulder would be like. Someone that thinks that they know what's right, and to some extent maybe might be correct to a little bit of a degree, but they think that they're perfectly correct, right? Like they know all of the answers to the universe, and they have this huge chip on their shoulder, and they don't really like interacting with people. Like, I don't necessarily think I was exactly like her as a teenager, but I definitely understand what she is, right? Who she is. I know people like her, and I might have been like her as well, right? I don't necessarily want to lie because I don't think I was necessarily like her, but I can't say that I wasn't, if that makes sense. Like, I definitely identify with certain elements of her character a lot, but at this point, I don't necessarily think that, like, looking at it like that is correct, right? So, I don't know. I have mixed feelings on Ryoka's character at the beginning. But her perspective eventually becomes interesting because you start to have like this social interaction issue, and then this becomes like a political problem, and she's good. Like, it's really interesting how this happens, right? So, she's a fellow Earther. She's a runner, which is a delivery man. She has social political issues, and she meets Lady Reinhardt, who is a noble woman, a human, who is descendant of basically the original colonizers of this continent they're on. And that makes it sound different than what it is. She's descendant of one of the original human colonizers that came to this continent after the Gnolls and the Drakes were already established in this continent, right? And I think they came from a place called Terrandia or something. And she is very interested in Ryoka, so much so that it actually causes problems for Ryoka because there's like political aspects to the Runners Guild, and she gets on the bad side of other runners, and she actually gets forced into an accident that gets one of her legs completely broken, shattered, and because of the medieval Renaissance level like style of the world that they're in, no one can really fix her except for Pisces. And the way that they get around to going to Pisces is because Ryoka, early on in one of her chapters, actually one of the chapters where I finally started liking her, she saved an adventuring team, the Horns of Hammerad, from a lich, because she was the only person willing to run them potions, and through her running, she actually helped distract the lich enough that they would be able to defeat it. And so these Horns of Hammerhead, who are run by a Minotaur, half-elf, and a bunch of humans, decide that they are honor-bound to help Ryoka in her time of need. And so Saria, the half-elf, remembers someone that can help her that is not one of the people that Lady Reinhardt had recommended for Ryoka, right? And this person happens to be Pisces, who was a fellow student at Windstrom with Saria back in the day, right? And so they go down to Liscor. They meet in front of Eren's Inn. She's actually out that day, so she doesn't get to meet Ryoka at this time. And Pisces immediately heals her leg. No problem. It was super easy. They pay him some gold, and they leave again, right? And it's good. Like, this part of the story is interesting. Then we're back to Eren. right? And Erin is back in town. She finally has gained some confidence. She understands that she was ripped off, and she becomes friends with Krisha the Knoll. And this Krisha lady is a great character. I love her a lot. And she's really nice to Erin once they get over the initial issues of like, why are you guys mean to me as a person? I didn't do anything wrong to you, right? And so this happens, and then Krisha and Erin manage to get Lissum, who is a Drake merchant that swindled Erin, to kind of accept a wager, right? Which is, if Erin wins at a game, she gets her money back, and if she loses, she pays him more, right? Or something like that. And it turns out that this world has recently introduced chess into its regular routine, and so Erin happens to be a phenomenal chess player. She was nearly grandmaster level as a child. She stopped playing for a while, and she recently, in the last couple of years before she was isekai, got back into loving the game. I loved chess growing up. I was part of the chess club at my school, and actually the university I go to right now has a really well-renowned chess club. I'm not really part of it, or neither am I part of the chess team, but chess is relevant to my life. I remember as a child, every Saturday morning, me and my dad, after I watched my cartoons and before we had lunch, me and my dad would sit in our dining room table and we would play chess, right? And sometimes we would play just normally, and sometimes we would play out of this book, the Mammoth Book of Chess, which had all of these great games from history, right? So there was Kasparov versus Deep Blue, or whatever the name of the robot was. Then there was a bunch of other ones, right? And we would always play them, and I would always pick the winning side because I was a child. And my dad would let me, and then we would kind of like talk about why they were good or why they were bad. And I still have all of those books, right? And so when Erin starts talking about chess, I immediately fall in love with her and her character, and really started loving this book, right? Like, I really enjoyed it up to this point, but once chess is introduced, I really love it because Erin manages to truly, deeply, like, encompass a love for a game very, very well, right? And so she accepts the wager. She manages to set it up and everything. And then Lissum calls Olisem, who is his nephew, and the only tactician left in the city, right? And tacticians are important to Liscor because Liscor has a giant standing army, and so they need a lot of tacticians, right? And all of these tacticians go off to help with the army, and Olisem, because he's the youngest, although he's in his 20s as well, happens to be the one left in the city. He loves chess, and he thinks he's going to beat Erin quite easily, but Erin mollywops him because she's that good, and he falls in love with Erin, essentially. Not exactly, right? But a little bit, right? It has that kind of like, he starts following her around like a puppy, trying to play chess with her because he's never met someone that can beat him. And the fact is that she doesn't have any skills to beat him, so she's doing it off purely like knowledge or ability or whatever you want to call it. It's kind of hard to differentiate between a skill as in like a game element and a skill as in something that I practice, right? With this kind of system, but you kind of get the idea. Olisem is like deeply interested in Erin because she teaches him to play chess, and they play chess together, and she's so much better than him, right? And so this is really when the story picks up for me. Like, it really gets really, really great for me right now. Then what happens? Erin asks Caleb to bring some of his friends, right? And because Caleb is from the Antinium Hive, he doesn't really have any besides Relk and I guess Erin, right? But Calabuckle really thinks that Erin is special. He really enjoys spending time with her, and so he acquiesces to her request, right? And so he goes to his queen. He asks her, hey, this human who I like and I think is important to us and is helpful has invited me to her inn and asked me to bring some other people with me. And so he does. And he brings 10 workers, I think, maybe 12, I can't remember, with him to the inn. Erin serves them a new delicacy, which is acid flies. And they love it because they're bugs, and so they eat other bugs, and it makes sense. And they really love it. And the workers love chess because it makes sense. There's rules. The Antinium Hive is basically a bunch of like robotic people, right? They're organic, but because of the way that their hive mind works and the way that they exist, basically the queen and Caleb are the only ones that have sentience, like proper sentience, and everyone else is just following like a program, right? And because of this, the Antinium love chess when Aaron introduces it to them. They fall in love with it because it has rules, it has established system, but because of the nature of it, it also allows them to be creative, right? And so it becomes a really interesting concept to them. And so it starts a chain reaction of events that leads to changes for the free hive of Liskor, right? Which is really, really interesting, right? Then while this is happening, some goblins become friendly with Aaron, and they actually come in as well. And eventually Aaron has like this very multi-racial, multicultural inn going on. And some of the goblins that become friendly are actually intelligent. One of them is very, very intelligent. Aaron starts calling her Rags, and that basically becomes her name. And this little goblin is really fun. She has some point of view character chapters throughout the book up to this point. And I really like this character a lot. And she's kind of just like really watchful all the time. She's really curious about everything, and she really picks up chess. And because of her interest in the game and her passion for it, she manages to unlock the tactician skill as well. And so she gains a certain level of extra sentience that none of the other goblins have. And so this causes her to become more and more important in the tribe. And this is cool. We get sent away to a different region of the world again in a chapter where we get introduced to this kind of like King Arthur figure, I guess you could call it. It's this guy who's a king who's been asleep for 10 years. And this sleep isn't really a real sleep. It's more like Odin's sleep plus depression that makes him kind of just like shut down. And with him shutting down, his kingdom shuts down as well. But because of the isekai people, two young twins emerge in his quarters, and he becomes interested in them. They tell him about their world, and this ignites a fire in him. He's like, damn, I never knew that there was something like that out there, that there's a whole nother world that I can go to that has all of these interesting, crazy things in it. And he reawakens, he gets reinvigorated, and he becomes, awake again. And so this is very important for later on. But at the time of reading this, I just didn't care. I was like, why? I want to go back to Erin and her chess playing. I was kind of bored by this, but there was a certain element of like interest to it as well, right? So yeah, as this is happening, and eventually later we come up to a new point of view, which is of a woman warrior with this rusted like metallic armor and 5 eyeballs. One of them is gigantic, and then 4 little ones. And this reminded me of, I think his name is Argos, the 100-eyed giant or something. I can't remember. It's like a Greek mythology character. And it reminded me of that. And Ghazi happens to be a half gazer. And gazers are these kind of like, mythological beings from Baleros, which is a different continent. And she's half that. And she happens to be part of Flosses, the King Arthur character I mentioned earlier, kind of like retinue or like one of his like top generals or something like that. And she's kind of just walking around across the world. And she eventually shows up at Liskor while Aaron is destroying this nest of iron spiders, right? Or shield spiders, I can't remember. And she's really interested in Aaron because she's like, I've never met a person like this girl. Something is really weird about her and very interesting, right? And so Ghazi ends up being part of the city for a while and friendly with Aaron. But her friendliness is a little bit duplicitous, although it doesn't really come off that way until the end of the book, right? So, back to Ryoka. The horns helped her heal, which I already explained earlier. And she kind of goes a little bit crazy at this point. She basically has been acting really cool, calm, and collected up to this point because of that, like, teenager chip on her shoulder mentality, right? She doesn't think that it's right to react negatively, and so she decides not to, and just kind of rationalizes everything away. But after being healed from like a traumatic injury and from dealing with all this shit and from having to be nice to people when she doesn't want to be, she kind of goes, you know, psycho. She goes on a crazy mission, and she can't. She's forced onto something else, but she can't. So it goes badly. Eventually, she comes back to Liscor. But it doesn't really work out for her. I can't remember exact details here. I think she tries to go to take runner, like, what's it called, duties at Selim, at the city where she got isekai to. They don't let her because Lady Reinhardt wants to control her, essentially. And so she decides to take a job that no one else will take, that takes her to the high passes. When she gets to the high passes, it doesn't really work out, so she has to leave. And it kind of, I don't know. It's really weird. Eventually, she makes it back to Liscor after a lot of crazy shit going on. But it's too late, right? Erin has been attacked by goblins. Calabacle has died protecting her. And the other Antinium become individuals, which was basically all kickstarted by the fact that they liked to play chess. And there's this really interesting set of chapters that explain how this happens and how aberrations are a thing that happens in Antinium hives, and that aberrations are bad. Basically, they become crazy. Essentially, it's like someone dropped like forbidden knowledge on them, and they go crazy, right? It's kind of very like H.P. Lovecraft type, like cosmic horror vibes, right? But these characters become individual, and we get the first immortal moment when Erin basically does stuff to kind of deal with the fact that she lost Caleb, right? That she lost basically her first friend in this world. And it's really, really great. This is an amazing moment, and I really, really liked it. And so there's some peace for a time, and then the crypt is discovered, right? The crypt is basically a ruin near the Liscor area, and this drives in a bunch of adventurers from all over the place, most of them human, because basically south of Liscor is really hard to travel through because this place called the Bloodfields, or the Blood Flood or something. I can't remember. But so basically everyone that comes into the city is from north, and north is where the human territories are, right? So basically a bunch of human adventurers come in. The Horns of Hammerhead are back at Liscor. They're kind of important here. And they stay at Erin's Inn, and so they become friendly with Erin. The Minotaur actually teaches Erin how to fight, and she gets a skill, and this is important because it's relevant later on. Then there's a second immortal moment with Pawn, because he's been hurt, because he is an individual, right? And so when Caleb died, the Hive lost his progenitor, which is basically like a prefect or a like the second to the queen, right? And so a new one came up, and his name is Kisumver, Ksmvr. And Kisumver is bad at his job compared to Calabuckle, right? And so he tortures Pawn, and this causes Pawn to eventually go to Erin, and she has an immortal moment with him. I think the first immortal moment is chess, and then the second immortal moment is her singing. And because of her skill, her singing actually includes all of the instruments that come with the music that she's singing. And so she sings over the rainbow, and you get to hear actually like the Isaiah version, like the Hawaiian version that, I can't remember his like Hawaiian name. It's really long, but that one, right? And some other songs, right? And these songs impacted Pawn, but also the Horns of Hammerhead, who heard this music, right? And that's why the Minotaur decides to train Erin, because he thinks the singer must not be silenced, and she is the singer, and so she must be taught how to fight. And this actually helps a lot. Eventually, the people at the crypt find, something important, and they accidentally release the Skinner, which is a giant bloodworm thing that has taken on a bunch of bodies, actually just the skins of bodies, onto itself and become this giant monster. It actually reminds me of, what's the name of the thing? Jozu, the creepy baby sword thing from Bleach. I can't remember what it's called. The Sanpakuto of the evil medical guy, right, from Soul Society. I'll show you a picture of what I'm talking about right now. That's basically what I thought Skinner looked like, and it was horrifying, right? And then Liskor falls under attack by all of the undead of the crypt, and it's really fucking horrible. Like, it's horrifying. There's some great battles, but basically all of the adventurers die. Half of the city is destroyed. Eren manages to survive to an extent, but shit doesn't go well for anyone, right? And at the end of the book, Ryoka arrives from her failed mission because she was trying to come back home, or, well, not home, but back to the Horns of Hammered before something happened to them, in order to apologize for all the shit that she did when she went a little psycho, but she wasn't able to do that. And so now she's kind of like lost, right? And the book ends with this really crazy moment, which is that Ryoka's iPhone starts ringing. And that's where it ends. And it's a crazy cliffhanger, and it was great. I really loved it. I thought it was super great. Very enjoyable. This book is phenomenal. I loved it. There was so much happening. I mentioned all of like the major points that I found to be important from the wiki, because I wasn't really taking notes while I was reading initially, and then it was too late for me to do that, so I kind of had to use my memory, but then I was like, I'm going to forget a bunch of stuff, so I used the wiki to help me. And so although there's more moments that I would have liked to talk about, I would have been able to, if I did this recording the day that I finished reading the book. But because I couldn't, a lot of that has kind of been washed away by more current wandering in memories. And so I really don't know the type of things I missed, right? If I ever do a reread for the channel, I'm going to do it as a like a book club where we take the time to read a few chapters at a time, and we join in the discussion together a little bit at a time, right? But for now, I thought this was the best thing that I could do. I really love this book. I'm not even done with my review yet because there's still more parts to go, but the plot line and the way that the plot unveils is really, really great. Sometimes I don't like that we get removed from Eren because we go follow other perspectives, but eventually those perspectives become interesting. And so it's not really too much of a big deal, but it does feel like there's a bunch of books here that are all kind of intermingled, right? And so every time you get a new perspective, it's like starting a new fantasy book, and you have to go through the whole slog of getting around to caring about the characters, right? But overall, phenomenal. It's so damn great. It's very brutal, but very hopeful too. There's a great balance that Pirateaba manages to hit between the reality of like this fucked up, not Mediterranean, medieval / just pre-Renaissance world, compared to like the easy like isekai slice of life vibes, right? And I think she does a great job at this, right? Phenomenal. In terms of characters, we have Eren, who's great. She's wonderful. She's awesome. She has so many brutal moments that she manages to overcome. And I love her character. I saw a few weeks ago on Reddit that a lot of people don't like the Wandering Inn, or don't like the beginning of the Wandering Inn, because it focuses so much on Eren. And one of the major complaints that I saw is that she's dumb, and she's stupid, and she's annoying. And I don't understand any of these complaints. Maybe it's because of the audiobook. I know Andrea Persnu, I think that's her last name, decided to give Eren a whiny voice because she thought that Eren sounded whiny at the beginning of the book. And maybe that's because she did it, she read the book when it was like the original version. I'm reading the current version, right? Which she redid, Pirateaba redid a few years ago, I think. And so this version, I think Eren is perfectly fine. Like, she's whining throughout the first couple chapters because her life has been turned upside down and she has no clue what the fuck she has to do to survive, right? So it makes sense. And then once she finally gets her feet under her, she manages to do really well for herself. Like, she's not like rich or anything, but she is managing day by day. She's struggling with the fact that she wants to go home, but she knows she can't, and she misses her parents, and eventually that goes away. And it's kind of weird that it does, but it does, and she manages to find a way to carve herself a community of friends, of people that she can trust, and it works really, really great. Yes, she's a little bit ditzy sometimes, but that adds to her charm. That's kind of like enjoyable because like a hyper competent character is boring, right? And I'll still enjoy reading a book of a hyper competent character. I mean, most isekai are about hyper competent characters, but it's really nice and refreshing to read an isekai where the main character doesn't like solve every issue just by being the best, right? She doesn't have a overpowered skill or anything. She's a very normal person, but she has that kind of like Luffy quality to her, which is if you interact with this girl enough, you want to befriend her and listen to what she's saying, right? And I really love that. I think it's great. I mean, honestly, I wish I knew someone just like Eren, right? I know people that have like shades of who Eren is, and I know that these people exist, but I don't know anyone like her, and I would love to know someone like her, right? Ralph the Drake is cool. He's a bro dude, like I said. He's not really my favorite, but some elements of him are fun. Caleb, the Antinium, is very collected but gentle. I really love his character. I think he's wonderful. He's probably my second or third favorite character in this story. I don't really like Kisumver at all. I like Pawn quite a bit. Knight is fine. And Pisces and Tauren. So Tauren is a undead skeleton that Pisces creates for Eren as a way to pay her back. And so Tauren becomes her servant and her protector. And it works out pretty great. I like Rags a lot. I enjoy Krishna. Celis is fun too. Celis is a Drake receptionist at the Adventuring Guild. I like Ghazi, and I like the Horns of Hammerhead, right? So Kalrus is the Minotaur, Saria is the Half-Elf, and there's a bunch of other characters, but those two are the only important ones. Kalrus is really fun, really cool. I really appreciate his like ridiculous honor-bound society that he's from and how it affects him and how it affects his interactions with people. But the funniest thing that I remember from him is that he's like, he has the hots for Ryoka. He's like, that woman is feisty and I want her. And she doesn't want anything to do with him. I think she's gay. I don't really know if that's the case, but there's quite a few things that she says throughout the first book that either hint that she's gay or at least that she's bisexual. And I think that's cool. I don't really have an opinion on it. But Kalrus really is super interested in Ryoka. And like the last thing I think he says before he goes off an adventure into the crypt before Ryoka leaves is like, God, that woman is so like feisty and she has huge titties. And it's fucking ridiculous. And I think it's so funny that that's like a memorable thing to him. He's like, she got titties unlike all of the other humans I've met. And that sounds insane. It's also funny because it like paints this picture of like Ryoka that's really odd for like a runner, right? Like she's been running forever. Running was like her favorite activity. And usually the thing that happens is that people that do sports either grow into a certain shape or already that shape. And so that shape of their body lends itself to being good at a specific sport, right? So runners are not necessarily big-breasted, right? In either gender. And it's funny that Ryoka is like this crazy, like badass, you know, don't fuck with me type of girl. And Kalrus is just like, yeah, her titties are huge. I think it's just hilarious, right? Ryoka's not really my favorite character in this book, but she does get better in book 2. So if you don't really enjoy her just yet, give her a few more chapters into the second book. You'll really like her at the end, I think. There's a lot of growth that comes with her. And I actually really like that she's so different from Eren. Like, Eren and Ryoka are kind of two sides of, like, what you would think a person should be like, right? Either, you know, they're like, fucked up emotionally like Ryoka, or they're really, like, nice and it seems like nothing's wrong with him like Eren, right? But, of course, both of them have, like, darkness to them that they hide in some way, right? So, yeah, I really like these characters. But Ryoka's kind of boring in this one. Although when she starts fighting people for no reason, it's kind of fun. Lady Reinhardt is great. I really like this character. I think she's ridiculous. And I just really love that she has, like, Like, she's like this calm, cool, collected lady. She's supposed to be a hero from a war. And then she just loves pink, like to a ridiculous degree. And she loves ice cream. And she becomes friendly with Ryoka because Ryoka shows her how to make ice cream. And I like this character a lot. And I also like her interactions with Ressa, who is her main servant, her main maid. And also kind of like her bodyguard or something. And yeah, characters-wise, pirateaba knocks it out of the park. I really, really like all of them. In terms of world building, well, I don't know where the hell this is. This is not Earth. Although maybe it could be a future Earth in some way. But it not really, because the first thing that Eren notices of this world when she's, you know, not being tortured by goblins is that the sky looks too big. That everything feels larger than it does on Earth. And that's really interesting. I wonder if that's actually true, or if it's just due to the nature of the fact that on Earth, everything feels small because we realize that, like, we have taken over too much of nature, right? Like, this kind of, I guess it's like the Pirates of the Caribbean thing, where, you know, Barbossa and Johnny Depp's character, Captain Jack Sparrow, are talking about the fact that the world is losing its luster, that everything has become too connected, and they're like from the pirate era, so that's like before globalization was really a thing. And they talk about how the Earth is shrinking, metaphorically, right? Because things are not, you know, magical anymore. There's no mystery to the world anymore, right? And so maybe the world of where Liskor is set feels that way because there's so much magic and mystery to it, right? Not necessarily because it's larger than Earth. And I'm not really sure what the answer is, but I find that to be an interesting thing to kind of talk about. It's a medieval fantasy setting, which is a little bit boring and kind of standard for isekai, but it just works so well. And actually, I don't necessarily think that it's really medieval. I wouldn't really say it's like nearly Renaissance. Like they got to the point where like they're past just like peasants, right? Like there's a certain level of like diversity in the wealth of the world, right? And there's also kind of like a lot of art and stuff like that is appreciated, right? So I would say this is more like near Renaissance level, but you know, it still has that same like medieval fantasy vibe to it. So it is what it is. There's really interesting magic systems here. So I can't remember if it's in this book or the next book, but Pisces explains magic to an extent. And he's like, yeah, I mean, you can learn magic without levels, but levels make it easier. And magic is basically an intake and an outtake of energy, right? And he basically describes the force. And it works well. And the leveling system is really interesting. It's really nebulous why it happens, but everyone just accepts it. And there's also kind of like a religious aspect to it, right? And one of the kind of tenets of this is, in order for you to level, you have to have sentience. And your sentience has to be able to, like, manifest itself, right? And so goblins can level, but they rarely do. And the few that do are basically humans. They get to that point. But they're broadly thought of as pests and disgusting monsters because they rarely level. However, this kind of puts into perspective this idea that, like, oh, so you're genociding like things that you are aware can level, and so you're going against your own doctrine. Like, why is this allowed, right? And you know, religion is always hypocritical, so it doesn't really make a difference. But like, it's kind of odd, and it's really interesting because like everyone is like at Renaissance level, even, you know, the gnolls, who are actually kind of like a nomadic people, right? But the goblins are still at like Stone Age level. And so it's kind of interesting because it kind of sets this idea that like maybe the goblins are just the same as everyone else, but because their like society is behind in terms of like technological development, they're mistreated, right? And we can see this in the real world as well. Like the whole reason why America is the way it is now is because the American people were so behind compared to the Europeans in terms of like technological development, right? In terms of civilizational development, in that sense, right? Technologically, right? Not necessarily culturally. You can kind of argue pro or against that if you really want to. I don't really care. I'm Mexican, so I'm just using this as an example because it's what I know best. But it's kind of interesting, and it kind of bothered me a little bit when Caleb explained this to Aaron, and no one really thought about the fact that we know that the goblins level, so why are we not trying to figure out a way to help them grow out of their savageness instead of like keeping them there and just kind of killing them off whenever we feel like, right? I think it's important. But I don't know, maybe there is a reason for this, right? And so, yeah, there's a lot of implied history here that's also really good. I think pirateaba did a great job at like doing the thing where the history of a fantasy world is supposed to be like an iceberg, right? You see the tip and it's really interesting, and you imply that there's more under the surface, but there really isn't, because that would take too much effort to make, right? And I'm sure some people do. I'm sure Tolkien, took the time to make the iceberg actually matter, but most people usually just do like the illusion of an iceberg, right? And I think pirateaba did a great job at that. So, overall, awesome. I think it's great. In terms of artwork and fan service, well, there's a lot of beautiful artwork included in the web serial. Mostly, it seems to be fan art submitted by other people that was, important enough that was added into the book. And I think that's cool. I really liked it. And as far as I know, there's no horny stuff in this book. Or in this first book, there's none. There's some saucy comments here and there. There's some moments that imply that this is, a thing, but it's not really mentioned. It's very kind of PG in this sense, in this book. So if that's something that bothers you, if you're not interested in stuff like that, no, don't worry. There is none of that here in this book. But, there are some saucy comments and stuff here and there for pizzazz, right? Ratings-wise, 4.5 out of 5 or 5 out of 5. Very good. But like I said, I can't give it a perfect score because some of the perspectives just did not interest me at all. Like I don't care about Floss. I didn't really care about Ryoka initially. Eventually I did, but it took a while to get there. And I also want to say that all of the characters are very distinct. Eren and Ryoka have really great emotional arcs that continue to develop into later books, or into the next book at least. And overall, this is just a great story. If you like, Sanderson or Wheel of Time or One Piece, but you don't really want to read another like traditional book, or you want to read something that's a little bit more lighthearted, I recommend this. I think that this is on par with, the Cosmere or Wheel of Time or One Piece in terms of like the development of the world and kind of the characterization. But it's a little bit different in terms of like what it tracks into, right? So I would put it up there, like, right? If I have to pick 10 favorite things, 10 favorite fandoms or stories, Star Wars, One Piece, Wheel of Time, Cosmere, Wandering In, Cradle, and whatever other things, right? Maybe Blue Log or something. I don't know, but Cradle and Wandering In quickly made themselves known into this top list here, probably because of recency bias. So in a year I'll answer that question again. But right now, I think it's one of the best things I've ever read. Maybe I've not read too much, I don't know, but I really, really like it right now. And I think it's great, and I think you should read it. So please do so. Thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you thought down below. I know no one's going to really watch this video, but if you do watch until the end, thank you so much. Please leave a comment and let me know that you did. And I really appreciate everyone that watches this, and I really appreciate pirateaba for making this book and for, giving me the chance to read it, basically. So, yeah, thank you guys very much for watching, and see you guys later.